Hello and welcome to the Our Prenup Lawyer podcast, where you and I get to learn more about prenups as I interview professionals from the fields of family law, couples counseling, and wealth management. I'm your host, Libby Garabedian. Let's get started. The information provided in this podcast is prepared by Our Prenup Lawyer for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship. This is not legal advice or a substitute for obtaining legal advice from an attorney. A person listening or watching should not rely upon it in any manner without engaging professional counsel. The podcast is intended to communicate general information and, because recorded, may not be current. On this episode, we talked to Jamie Lima, founder of Allegiant Divorce Solutions and Secure Split. With nearly 20 years of experience, he specializes in helping clients navigate divorce and complex financial decisions with clarity and confidence. His mission is to make financial planning accessible and empowering for those facing major life decisions. Hi, Jamie. Thank you so much for being on today's podcast. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Looking forward to it.
Great. Let's get started. So I first want to talk about your business, Allegiant Divorce Solutions. What is it? How did it get started?
Great question. Thanks for leading off with that because we just jump right into it, right? I am the product of a divorce. My parents were divorced when I was really young, and I watched them go through that experience in my early days, and I started in the financial services industry about 20 years ago, as you mentioned. And over the years, I just saw like so many clients just dealing with this on this. It's like systematic, right? Like at one point I had 400 clients that I was responsible for at one of the big name companies that I was with. And you're dealing with, 3 to 5 divorces a year with that many, clients under your belt. So I had a lot of experience with it from the professional perspective. And then again, personally in 2017, I went through a divorce myself and realized at that time, like, even though I had some early personal experience with it. I had some professional experience to that point. I was a certified financial planner, so I feel like I had a really good handle on the financial aspects of things. Even I made some mistakes, and there were some challenges in my own divorce, years ago. And I was like, wow, like if I have all this experience myself, both personally and professionally, there's so many people out there that don't have any of that experience, and they don't have the financial wherewithal as well. They don't have the financial experience knowledge that I have as well. It's like there's a real need for this. And that's where Allegiant Divorce Solutions came from, is stemming from that need. Because there's so many people out there, the 600,000 plus divorces a year.
Wow.
And that doesn't include, there's so many more that are like pro se, and they try to go through mediation or whatever. But that's kind of where the company came from. It's just my own personal and professional experience, just seeing it and dealing with it firsthand.
I do want to touch on that in a second about your own experiences and how that informs your practice. But what types of professionals do you work alongside with, and what is the process and the services that you offer at Allegiant Divorce Solutions?
We really like to try to work hand in hand with family law attorneys and mediators. I'm a certified mediator myself and been doing that work for a while now. And I think there's a real need to have a cohesiveness between all of the professionals that you're working with if you're going through a divorce. And there are a lot of family law attorneys out there that understand the work we do, and they recognize like, wow, like I'm not a professional and not an expert in the financial side of things. Having somebody in that realm and having the experience that we do can be beneficial. So we try to have a coordinated effort. I'm really not interested these days in taking on cases where we're going to be banging our heads against a wall, just fighting with the attorney all the time. It's not good for the client. It's not good for my psyche, frankly. So we would rather work hand in hand with other professionals like that, and even other professionals too, like maybe not outside the law realm, like family law, family therapists, and other people that are in your support system. If you are going through a divorce, we want to work with them as well to help make sure that at the end of the day, our job is really just to put you on a nice solid foundation moving forward. And if whoever is involved in that process, we're certainly happy to collaborate with them.
So it's really a comprehensive collaboration with as many people in the network of who's ever divorced you're working with in their
100%.
network. Mhm.
100%. Yeah.
So going back to, you mentioned your product of divorce, you had your own divorce. What kind of perspective do you bring to your practice after going through all of that?
Well, I can help people not step on the same landmines that I stepped on in my own divorce. I think just having that experience and understanding the process, understanding like what the attorney's job is and what the terms mean, and understanding like what the court system process really is, because it can be very confusing. It can be very lengthy depending on how backed up the court system is, and really just getting to understand, seeing firsthand, having gone through it myself, like helping others understand what the expectation should be. Because I feel like a lot of people think that they're just going to go into this, they're going to file some papers. A few months later, they're going to be divorced, and their life is going to be easy peasy. That is not the case at all. And again, I've made some mistakes along the way, and helping others just not make the same mistakes is a big deal.
No, that's great. That's great that you're able to, yeah, use your own experiences and you want to help others and do good. So how I know that divorce is a very intensive process, especially if it's highly contested or, you know, the parties are just not agreeing, right? So how costly in monetary value, but also in emotionally, is a typical divorce in California?
California divorces can be expensive. And I think that's why one of the goals that I have for the work with the work we do is to try to stop some of that madness, right? Like, if you can, it may seem counterintuitive if you hire an attorney and you hire a financial planner to get you through this, and then you have all these other expenses that your regular day-to-day expenses that you're dealing with as you're going through this divorce. It may seem counterintuitive to hire two professionals or multiple professionals, but the reality is that if your attorney can stay in his or her lane and help you solely on the legal aspect of things, and you have the financial professional on the financial side of things working in their area of expertise, and there's a coordinated effort between the two, there's a high probability that you're going to save money in the long run, because you don't have the attorney trying to spin their wheels and figure out the financials. It's just not their area of expertise. I don't even know, to be honest, to fully answer the question what the average cost of a divorce in the state of California is. I can share with you, mine was $85,000, and I am not LeBron James. Like, we had a house, we had a couple of cars, we have a couple of kids. We don't like there weren't businesses at that time. There weren't all these other complications that I see in a lot of the cases that we work with. Why it had to be so expensive, who knows? I can guess why that was the case, but it just seemed like to take forever, and it was so expensive. And again, being and even having the financial experience that I have had at that time, it was really tough to stem that tide.
Okay, so let's take a step back. So you're dealing with people who are going through a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
How can couples prepare before marriage or at the start of their marriage, just in case things don't work out? Can a prenup enter the discussion and help with the finances to give them peace of mind?
I am a firm believer in it. Not just because I'm having this conversation with you, but I think you've heard me say this in other podcasts that I've been on, and I talk a lot about it in social media and whatnot. But I think if you have any assets that are at stake as you're heading into the marriage, not having a prenup, even just a simple one, is setting yourself up for failure. At least future financial failure. I can't promise what that's going to happen with the marriage. It may go well, it may not. But if you have some assets to deal with, you owe it to yourself and to your loved ones to make sure you handle that. And it seems very it's an icky conversation. It's not one that people want to have, especially when it's all rainbows and butterflies at the beginning of a relationship. But neither is death, or neither is a car accident. But you have life insurance, you have car insurance. If your house were to burn down, that's not a great experience, but you have homeowners insurance. Why do you not have marriage insurance? And a prenup is exactly that. So I'm a huge proponent for it, and I think it'll. Now, if you're just starting off and it's you're in this relationship and you don't have any assets and the other doesn't have any assets and you're really starting from ground zero, then maybe it's not really worth that, because everything you build over the coming years is going to be marital asset anyway and subject to division in a divorce. But if you have an inheritance or whatever it is, and you have some assets leading into the marriage, you should absolutely have that document in place.
At what point in a relationship, whether it's the engagement or even before that, should a couple start discussing whether or not they're going to have a prenup to see if it's even something that both of them agree on?
I would put it in my Hinge profile or whatever they're called these days. I don't know. I've never had any of those apps, but like whatever they are, like swipe right, swipe left, like whatever those apps are, you should probably put it in there. No, I'm only kidding. I think when you feel like things are getting serious, you're starting to have that discussion. And a lot, that's how when I feel like when people are starting to get to that point and you're having conversations about like when might we want to consider doing this and making this a formality. Because I think this day people have that conversation more often, right? It's not like you're just gonna like somebody's gonna show up on your doorstep, ask you to propose, and then next thing you know you're married that following weekend. Like I'm sure that happens in some places in Las Vegas every once in a while with those, the drive-through wedding chapels. But the high probability is that most people are talking about this, discussing it, maybe even discussing it for years before they decide to eventually tie the knot. And I think when you're starting to have those conversations, you should absolutely bring it up.
And couples going along with this idea establish healthy financial boundaries in their relationship?
Good question. One of the things that I see happen with a lot of the clients that I've worked with over the years is that there tends to be one financial decision maker in that relationship, right? And not to be sexist, but 9 times out of 10, it's usually the guy who is, he's the family CFO, and he's going to make all the financial decisions, and the wife is along for the ride. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. I think it's the absolute wrong way to do it. But at the end of the day, that's what I've seen over my 20-year career. That's usually how it happens. So to help put boundaries up and to create a really good relationship with money in general, both parties should be involved in the financial discussions, right? If you're having a conversation with your financial planner, if you're going by yourself to have that conversation with the financial planner, you're doing it wrong. Both spouses should be in conversation with financial planners, and they should be interviewing the planner together to make sure that everybody's comfortable. And really, you just have to be open and honest and transparent with, like, what have I saved? What do I own? What are my goals? And what is my real relationship with money? Because we all have a money story, right? We either, we have experiences that in the past, like myself, that have shaped the way that I handle money. You have an experience yourself in your life that has shaped the way that you handle money. And if you're not transparent and having that conversation with your soon-to-be spouse, again, you're probably setting yourself up for failure, because they're going to have their own story that they're dealing with. And if they don't know your story, it's kind of hard to make things really cohesive. So I think it's all about communication, really.
So if you avoid conversations with your spouse about money, it's really not a reasonable expectation that you're going to build a sustainable financial future.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. I mean, you have to have these conversations.
So let's go back to more about what you do. How do you advise people who are going through a divorce and maybe they don't feel confident that they'll be able to support themselves or their family under these new circumstances? How do you help get them on the right track or in the right mindset to financial success?
Well, I think it's about education first. And sometimes people don't have the confidence that they're going to be okay, and just simply because they don't have the education. They don't teach you this stuff in school. They certainly don't teach you how to budget. They don't, I don't know what they taught you when you were in school, but I never learned those things. I had to learn all the things that I learned about budgeting and cash flow management and all this investing all came post graduation. So I recognize that people that are other lines of work, in healthcare or first responders or technology, whatever it is, they're not teaching this stuff, and you're not living it day to day like someone like myself is. So one of the main things we do is try to educate as much as we possibly can, which is why I'm having this conversation with you today, which is why we have our own podcast, which is why we try to be active on social media, and we have a newsletter and we have a Facebook group and all these things, because it's all about educating people to empower them to make good financial decisions moving forward. And once you have that power, then it's much easier to have conversations. And like, I'll give you an example. We're having a conversation today with one of our new clients, and this is the very first meeting after our intro call. And she started to give us financial information, so on and so forth. So the whole premise of our conversation today is understand where we are, understand where we're headed, and educate on where the gaps may be. And if we can do that, if you can, as a client, or as a in general, if you can understand where you are, where you're headed, it's much easier to handle the gap in between, right? So how are we going to solve that? Like, how are we going to make sure we put her on the right path moving forward? What do we need to help share with her to help her understand? Like, is she going to be okay? Is she not going to be okay? And what adjustments do we need to make? So I don't know if that's really helpful or not, but I really think at the end of the day, it really comes down to education and empowering people to make good financial decisions moving forward.
So when you have clients who have different degrees of financial literacy and education, that how does your approach differ when you're on the side of maybe the higher earning spouse who has a little more education, or the lesser earning spouse who isn't as confident, or maybe in a case where a spouse has completely given up their career to stay at home and take care of the kids? Um, how do you go about, I guess, educating them? Obviously, it's a case by case basis, right?
Case by case basis, and I think you just have to know your audience. If I'm talking to somebody who is a financial planner or has experience, because I've worked with financial planners that are going through a divorce. I've coached and trained financial advisors. I'm speaking at the NAPFA conference in a few weeks, which is our national conference, to financial planners about some of the pitfalls that they're going to face, their clients are going to face in divorce, right? So there's a lot of people that we work with that have a lot of this education. So if you know your audience and you know who you're talking to, what their experience is, getting to know them as a person, then it's much easier to communicate with them. I think if I can maybe go a little bit faster. I don't have to stop and educate and define certain things and so on. Now, if I'm talking to the stay-at-home spouse, the person that isn't educated in this world and so on, you have to take a lot more time with them, which is okay, because I never want people to make a decision which is going to impact them for the next 5, 10, 20 years of their life, and they don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it. So you have to, if you're an advisor out there, or if you're or if you're meeting with someone who isn't, and you're the out spouse, you're the one that needs the education, and the person that you're working with is using a bunch of jargon, and they're not emotionally connecting to you and understanding your perspective and so on, it may be time to find somebody else to talk with. Because if that's the approach that you have, or if you're receiving that type of communication from the person you're working with, how successful are you really going to be? So I think again, you have to, it's all, know your audience, know the education level, the experience, and so on, and toggle your communication appropriately. And sometimes you have to take a little more time to ensure that even define certain things. If I said something like, your portfolio has 60% equities in it and 40% bonds, that may mean one thing to somebody, and they're like, okay, well, they would just totally understand that. They get the risk profile and so on of that portfolio, and the spouse may not have a clue is what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So you have to really, it's all about it. it all comes down to the experience, right? After 20 years, you kind of get a chance, you get a sense of like who you're talking to and how you should be talking with them.
Yeah, and that's a great approach. And what you mentioned earlier about if you have a financial planner who's kind of just rushing you through it, not defining things, might not be a good fit. But this obviously have a good, clear approach where you're not trying to overwhelm someone. You're trying to bring clarity and trying to make the process go smoother.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how does financial planning and career growth look different for single parents after divorce?
Well, a lot of them are trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what's next, right? And one of the things that we do, and I think we do really well with our clients, is we help them through a process we call transition assistance. What that means is that, if you look at it from the perspective of the work we do compared to the attorneys, as when the attorney is going to take that person through the divorce, get them from point A to point B, pat them on the back, say, hey, congratulations, it was nice working with you, congratulations, you're divorced, and move on. In many ways, that's where our work is only about half done, because our job now is to go in and make sure that if there's money being transferred to them, are they receiving it in the right way? Are they processing those transfers the correct way? Do they have the right accounts opened up? Are they taking money out of a retirement account by way of a qualified domestic relations order or quadro? We'll help them process all of that and do all that the right way. And that's, in many ways, that's helping them set that foundation to move on to the next level, right? Like I can't do business interview coaching and help them get a new job, and I can't help them do all those things because those are all the practical next steps, right? They may have to get more education or a new job or move to a new city, or I can't really help them with those things. But what I can help with is ensuring that the foundation is set from a financial perspective. They understand their budget, they understand what's coming in, what's going out, what they own at this point, what they owe if they own anything, and really just try to set them up from a financial successfully from a financial perspective. Their job then is to do the other work, to help move on to the next phase of their life.
Now, if you have a blended family or a couple getting a gray divorce, because obviously people are living longer, those are more common, and they didn't have a prenup in their first marriage, but now they've accumulated assets and other marital property. What are your thoughts on individuals in those circumstances getting a prenup or perhaps a postnup if they stay married and don't get divorced to ensure their financial futures and take care of their kids?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, I think, especially with the second marriages, I mean, having because now you're probably established in your career, you've got some assets to work with. There were some things at stake that could, and you're not getting any younger, right? If you're, maybe you've been married for 10 or 20 years and now you're going into a second relationship. Well, now you're 20 years older, and let's just face facts. There's very few companies out there that are going to start hiring a 60-year-old, because they know in 5 years, or maybe at least less than 10, you're probably going to retire. So why would they spend all that time to hire you and train you and so on? So the older you get, the less runway you have to rebuild your financial future. So heading into a second marriage, it is incredibly advantageous to have one. And if you're in a same-sex marriage, you should 1000% have a prenuptial agreement, because unfortunately, same-sex marriages, the percentages of divorces in same-sex marriages is significantly higher than heterosexual marriages, right? And that's it's usually 50% for the first marriage, second over 60, almost 70% for second marriages of traditional families. Same-sex marriages are well into the 70% for even the first marriage. So I'm on your side with this one. I think a prenup for everyone. Like Oprah, we should be all giving out. You get a prenup, and you get a prenup. Everybody should be getting a prenup.
What about, I think we mentioned it earlier in one of the prior conversations, or excuse me, just in one of my previous questions. What's the benefit of having a prenup when you have one partner who is being supported by the bank of mom and dad and they have inheritances or other assets coming to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the same scenario, right? If you have the bank of mom and dad, or you have a trust fund baby that you're dealing with in the divorce, it's I think it's advantageous for both, right? Because if you know you're going into a marriage and you're going to and you that is the premise of the marriage, right? Maybe you're going to benefit in some way from that trust fund, and it's the vacations and the house and the cars and all the things that go along with that. Like maybe there's like it's a more affluent situation, and you're going to postpone your career or completely not have a career to live that lifestyle. Yes, that's a choice. It's a mutual choice, but having a prenuptial agreement in place that protects you because of that choice that you're making, where maybe you're like, hey, listen, I don't need to work, because, or maybe you want to work, but you don't need to work, and your spouse says, just I'll take care of things, don't worry about it. I have this trust that and bank of mom and dad's going to take care of us, no problem. That's a joint decision that needs to be protected, in my perspective. From my perspective, is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? I don't know. But if I were representing that client, I would say you absolutely need to make sure that you have a prenup in place, because even if it's just for a short period of time after, if there is a divorce that's involved, you want to ensure that you can maintain some semblance of the lifestyle that you lived previously and give yourself enough time to be able to rebuild, get back in your career, maybe get more education and so on to get back on, the next phase of your life. So, regardless of the scenario, I think it's a huge benefit. Again, it comes back. It's just that people don't have these conversations because they don't want to believe that something bad could happen, and it's just not the case.
In your own practice, have you ever run into a situation where maybe alimony or child support written into a prenup or postnup hasn't been honored by one side?
We've had a couple of those cases. The real problem with that is I'm thinking through, like, there were one or two cases where it was written in there. Unfortunately, there was a lot of ambiguity, and there was vagueness involved. It wasn't rock solid, I guess is what I'll say, right?
Mhm.
And when in this particular case, both cases, it was a female. So when she went back to try to bring this up in court and talk about like what was owed her and so on, it wasn't necessarily a lock because of the way that the document was written. Maybe the spouse knew that was the case, and that was by design. I'm not really sure. I wasn't there 15 years ago when they signed these documents, but if you are considering having this drafted in your agreement, you want to make sure that it's locked in and rock solid, right? I mean, like, what are the terms? What is the length? What happens if the payments aren't made? And that's the biggest one. And we see this not just with alimony and child support and everything else. You always want to know who is doing what and by when in these contracts. And if I owe you, Libby, X dollars for X number of years, what is the fallout if I don't do that? That should be written into a contract. And I see that missing all the time.
So, what advice would you give to engaged couples on, from all the negative divorces that you've seen, but also the happy
Yeah.
marriages? What advice would you give to couples about how they can have a successful marriage?
I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is really just about communication, right? And setting the expectation. Because, if you go down this path, you get married, and there's no communication, there's no real expectations of who's going to do what, then one person may just simply just be like, hey, like I thought this is how it was going to go, and it's not going that way, and now I'm disappointed. And the other person is like, well, we never talked about that, and this is how I thought we were going to do this. If there's no communication, you're setting yourself up for failure. I mean, you have to communicate. You have to, if you're a business owner, you have to communicate with your employees. If you're a coach of a team, or what, right, you have to communicate with your players. Life is all about communication and communicating with the people that are most important to you in order to have success. And if you're not communicating in your marriage about especially about the financial stuff, it's I hate to say it, but that's the reason why I'm going to be gainfully employed for the foreseeable future.
So, how do you tackle when you have a client who maybe there wasn't that communication in the marriage, right? Now you're going through a messy divorce. How do you help them on the financial side start to build up that communication, or at least as they go through this process, be a little more open and I guess yeah, just communicate with you and with other people
Yeah.
if they're maybe lacking that skill.
One of the things that we do with every client of ours, and we'll do this with that client that I mentioned that we're meeting with for our first full meeting today, this afternoon, which is a new client of ours. And one of the things we'll do is we'll walk them through what we call a my priorities exercise. And we have a little a short document that we send to everybody ahead of our first meeting. It basically just says like, what are your priorities in each of these categories? Like what about the kids and what about the house and what about other financial aspects and so on and so forth. And we'll have them just walk us through that. So I will literally pull up that document on the screen and have her just share like in your own words, tell me what we've got going on here. And by going through that exercise, it may sound, I don't know. I'm not really one of those people that's going to sit down and write my feelings out, right? Like if I ever went to a therapist and they were like, okay, just sit down and talk about your feelings and write them down, I would fire that therapist in 2 minutes. So I'm not that kind of guy. But having people walk us through that and taking them through that experience, it's not really, it's a little bit therapeutic, but it also gives us a sense of where they're coming from and what in their brain is the number one priority in each of these particular categories. And having them communicate that to us and put that in their own words is incredibly powerful. So I think it's a great place to start because that also helps us understand their education and what they're, maybe they're really concerned about this, certain aspects of the divorce, and they just need to be educated on how things work. We can tackle that. But it also operates like kind of a guidepost for us and lets us understand what their true north is. Because I may look at their case, which I will review before we step into the meeting, and I'll review all the details and everything. And I'll have in my own brain my own story about her story and start thinking like, okay, like here are the 5 or 6 things, and we need to make sure these are going to be the hot buttons and so on. And her hot buttons may not be the same as mine. So I'll bring them up to her, make sure she's aware of them, and just here's what we saw, here's what we think, like here's how do you want to tackle these things. But you walk us through what your hot buttons are and why they're most important to you. And by having that cohesive communication with her will allow us to understand like what when we start getting into negotiations, it's like, okay, what hills do we want to die on in this negotiation? Is this important to her or not? And if it's not, then maybe it's a giveaway and we get something in return for it. Or maybe it's something that we're just going to know we're going to have to stand firm on and really fight hard for. But if we don't go through this experience and take them through this practice, we're never going to know.
Thank you for talking about that. And I do want to know, how can listeners reach you if they're interested in connecting?
If listeners want to reach out, easiest way is simply to go to the website, allegiantds.com. You can learn more about the work we do, even down to like our pricing model and so on, how we work from a price perspective. If you do your research, which I would encourage you to do, and people want to book a call and talk a little bit further about their situation, they can just scroll down about a third of the way down the page. There's a link to the calendar. They can book a call right there, and we'll spend 30 minutes with them in a confidential, complimentary conversation, just talking about the situation, where we might be able to help. And if we can't, try to point them in the right direction. It's not a big deal for us to get calls booked, and it's not a fit for us. It's not a fit for them, but we do our best to try to point them in the right direction. So that's the easiest way. Just go to the website.
Great. And we'll have your website in the episode description. So if people didn't get a chance to write that down, they'll be able to click on it from there.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you.